Hello, I'm Peter Fatty. Thank you for joining me to discuss increasing engagement in online learning using blended online learning. Now, blended online learning grows out of blended learning, which has become a very common format in higher education and also has been shown to be the most effective format, more effective than face-to-face alone, more effective than asynchronous LMS-based instruction alone. This is with the LMS enhancing the face-to-face classroom with content posting, especially multimedia content, quizzing, grades, of course, assignments turn in and turn back, and very importantly, the asynchronous discussion board, where we're looking at not only doing something we do in class and hopefully trying to make it almost as good, but actually, as it turns out, and as 15 years of research now supports and guides, asynchronous discussion board really becoming a mode for critical thinking and really something that is not only is as good as, but better than in most cases, or at least different than, and a very good thing to what you get in face-to-face classrooms, a very good enhancement of the face-to-face classroom. The other thing is that having the LMS there can free up the flipped classroom. For instance, we can pre-record the video lecture so that the meeting time, when actually people have gotten themselves together in the same room, the same time, in person, has group activities that really reward that, when you think about it, high overhead instructional format. Now, when we go to blended online learning, now we flip the script a little bit. Now it's the learning management system that becomes the central portion of it. That is the established part, like face-to-face was in blended learning. And we're adding the LVC, we're adding the live virtual classroom, the synchronous part of that, in order to enhance and increase the engagement of that LMS-based instruction. Now, that's not necessarily that popular thing, that popular a proposition, as we see from Hank here. And this was some time ago, but this was recorded off of a LinkedIn group, online teaching professors, making all the students be in one place at one time, even in cyberspace, largely destroys the advantage of online education, which is learning when the student has the spare moment. Of course, it's that convenience that has led to the exponential growth of online learning. Now, however, we're entering into a completely different era where the convenience alone isn't enough. The student expects more and should expect more from their online learning experience. Now we've got to have a little bit more of a quality sell. But this is not necessarily so easily accomplished. Now, let me read this to you. Doesn't everybody hate the PowerPoint slide with all the text? But this is critical. This is from an article by Lowenthal, Snelson, and Dunlop, and it really captures what we're getting after here. Most online courses rely predominantly on asynchronous text-based communication, which is not surprising when one considers the correspondence study tradition of distance learning from which online learning evolved. While we understand the benefits of asynchronous, we also believe, based on the literature and our experiences, that there are inherent affordances of communicating in real time, face-to-face, using synchronous video communication technology. However, we have struggled to effectively use live video-based synchronous communication in our online courses. And so that's really why we're here today, is to really think about what do we do with and in that LVC session that allows it to enhance the LMS-based instruction. Well, I mean, the most obvious thing to do is basically just to transfer the classroom into the online environment. For several years, I used the Adobe Connect format that you see here, the platform, very much like a straight presentation at in a lecture room in a university. You've got the whiteboard over here. You've got the discussion, which is a nice thing, the chat in there, kind of what they call back channels sometimes, can be interesting, and people can raise their hand, make a comment. So that's kind of a standard thing. I've now gone over to using this Zoom format that we're using here, partly because for graduate education, it gives a lot more of a kind of a conference room type feel. We'll see that in a moment. But you can still do the standard kind of teaching classroom PowerPoint based presentation. And here you can see the students, you can kind of follow them all along. Now you don't have space to put on all the students. There are about 16 or 18 students in this class, but you can kind of pick and choose and have a few up there, and then you can rotate that and let them through there. So it's a very traditional type of approach with a PowerPoint based lecture, or being able to share from the desktop readily, as you could in a computer enhanced classroom with a projector, where we're using here a concept map again with some of the students seen on the side. We can also do some other kinds of things though, which certainly you can do in the face-to-face classroom. You can bring in a guest for an interview or a guest lecture, in this case in the right middle of our Brady Bunch Hollywood Squares type of look here. We've got a professor who uses online learning and is talking to our class on that. The audio is not great, but we'll get an idea of how that works within the format.
So I have a rubric, and my rubric for that is based not only on the quality of the response, but how many contributions to the discussion. Like your students, maybe we can have Janan comment on this if you're doing that in the class. Then after you post Janan, after you do your summary, then aren't you kind of curious to see if other people thought the same thing you did? Oh yeah, I immediately go to the responses right after I respond. Not only because I have to like respond to their responses, it's just like out of curiosity. I wanted to know what they thought about it.
Well, and like I say, with our screen capture here, we don't get as good a quality of audio and video as we get with this Zoom format. One reason why it is now becoming very, very popular, widely used in business and in organizations for online meetings. Another thing that we can do with this format is to break into individual groups as you would in the classroom. Again, not necessarily using the face-to-face time for the lecture component, but here what we had was the groups coming back. They had small group, now they're coming back and we're putting it up on the board.
In our activities. One other thing that we talked about with the mentoring is having peer modeling. So there might be students who are more familiar with technology, pairing them with the students who aren't as familiar, and letting them shadow. I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Well, so there we see some of the things that we can do in the LVC activities. Obviously, the lecture with interaction, and we don't even have a name for that. We can't call it interactive lecture. That's something else. Interactive video, that's something else. We don't really have a name for what is certainly the most common mode of instruction in higher education. What's curious is that if I pre-record a lecture using the screen capture, it'll be 5 minutes straight through. Same lecture, same slides, done in the LVC, just as it would be in the face-to-face, now takes 15 minutes. The 15-minute lecture now takes 50 minutes, just because you're inviting feedback, you're extending with stories and examples and that sort of thing. The LVC is also very good for student presentations, small group discussion, as you saw there, where you've got the breakout rooms and come back to that, the guest lecturer interview, the discussion group, which is typical in higher education, but if you have a GA or some other student-led kind of discussion group, they can meet at some kind of off time. And virtual office hours. Now I showed you the quote from the researchers at the front, our long kind of purposeful quote, and that was actually from their recent study on virtual office hours. And by that, they don't necessarily mean individual times. What they did was they would have a time, and they did it 4 times a week, or I mean 4 times a semester, where they would invite the students to come into that and they would answer any questions. And the students found that interesting because sometimes they didn't even know they had a question, so they learned from some other student's question. And then based on what students had requested, also present some original content within the virtual office hours, and to give them some credit for it. So that was kind of an original LVC type activity. So here's some tips, again, from the very limited literature on this, and really it is unfortunately limited, as well as our experiences. So obviously we want to record and post the LVC, and that actually takes care of most of Hank's concerns with taking apart our asynchronous convenience model. No, it's not as nice to watch the recording as it is to be in the LVC, but it's not that much worse. It's like watching the recording of a rerun of Saturday Night Live, back in the good old days. Watch the Belushi ones and the Dan Aykroyd ones and Gilda Radner ones. And, okay, you still get the energy of that having been recorded live, even though we're watching it on Memorex. So it's really critical to record that. And as it notes down here too, also consider having it non-required. These are all kinds of ways we can take away from Hank's concern there. You can have a weekly meeting, which is what I often do because it fits with that 16-week course. You can also have that other kind of thing, where they were doing with the live, the virtual office hours. Now, I do suggest that when you have that meeting, that you have less time than you would in a face-to-face one. If you normally have in a graduate class a 2.5-hour once a week meeting, I suggest no more than 60 to 90 minutes for that, partly because the online format really just kind of exhausts you more, exhausts everybody more. The other is that we want to be in the blended online format just as in the blended face-to-face plus LMS format. We really want to be wary of course and a half syndrome, that we don't want to end up overloading everybody with this. There's so much you can do with these enhanced formats that it's a little bit easy to overload those things. So we want to be cognizant of that. As I said, consider making it non-required, where you're just it's value added. There's enough value that people come to that. But again, with Hank's concern, if they just can't make it, non-required. Although you could also make it required to either attend or watch the recording. But I don't then actually like to do a lot of original content presentation. When we're midway in a class, I like to take that weekly in between meeting and debrief the activity that we're just completing and introduce the next activity that's coming up. If somebody missed it, they wouldn't be missing that much, but they like to be involved in that. And offer participation points if somebody's coming into that, not necessarily with trying to count how much they're participating, because that's hard in a live situation, not as easily counted as it is in the ADB. So most of the participation points are still in the ADB, but offer some participation points just for joining the LVC. And then this is probably the one that got your attention when we had the whole list up there, the student driver. Well, you saw when we had the group coming back from the small group ones, and I'm trying to type into the whiteboard, which is just a Word doc that I have open, and listen to them and type into that, and it can be hard to walk and chew gum at the same time. So you can give host type of duties for a day to one of the students, and they can type in some of those things. So you need some more support with this, but sometimes you can get that just from the people in the group. So this is basically a structure of what we're looking at with the blended online learning, the LMS central use plus the enhancing LVC use. For faculty who don't have any experience with this at all, this can make a nice introduction. It does still require some technical and instructional support, and a Center for Teaching Excellence, as we have at SIU. It wants to help people with that. This is not completely easy. There are there are things that need to be done with it, but it can kind of be learned. Now, if we go down to the bottom of that, and maybe that's Hank down there with the online experience, LMS based, feeling like he's got an established LMS pedagogy in place that the LVC just disrupts, fine. No, don't use the LVC. It's there to offer enhancements. And so perhaps he just does the virtual office hours or something like that, that adds to the class without actually changing the LMS based pedagogy. It's this middle group that we really see as potentially being productive in this blended online format. That is, people who are experiencing more and more blended learning in the face-to-face plus LMS. Maybe they're experimenting with the flipped classroom type approaches. And again, a Center for Teaching Excellence can grow into the enhanced online education by first growing faculty into good and creative, not just facilitative use of the LMS to enhance their seated course. And so, that's where we really see the transition there. We want to get people involved in creative and engaging blended learning, and then transfer that into blended online learning. And now we have an online delivery that is well beyond the electronic correspondence course. That certainly has been an efficient, but not always engaging model for online learning. Now, a lot of what's presented here, including that framework that we just looked at, comes from the chapter Blended Online Learning, Misconceptions, Benefits, and Challenges from this book, Online Learning. And I'm glad to share that chapter with anybody who would email and make a request from that. And at the same time, give me your opinions, your experience, your ideas for using this engaged blended online learning format. Now, we also hopefully have time and the technical wherewithal here, the technical support to have a bit of discussion among ourselves. So we can do that by, I'm sitting in my room there. I'm sitting in my Zoom room, and there's not a link for you, so you'll just have to type this in. Boy, don't you hate typing URLs? That's like programming a VCR back in the old days. It's just like a 50% success rate. But anyway, there's your link right there. And as I say, if everything's facilitating in the room, please do feel free to type that in. If you haven't used Zoom before, you'll be asked to download a small program. Hopefully we've got adequate bandwidth in the room, and then we can go in there and have a bit of a discussion period of our own. Thank you very much for your attention.